G'day humans, welcome to the safe space for dangerous ideas. Here's a dangerous question for you. Is artificial intelligence intelligent in any meaningful way, or is it just scraping all of its troves of input data in order to spit out essentially what is a very fancy autocomplete? The latter would be the position of one of the most influential people in technology in the world, Jaron Lanier, who has written a number of books, including 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now, You Are Not a Gadget, and Dawn of the New Everything. He is the man who coined the term virtual reality. He was one of the first virtual reality pioneers. He founded the first company to sell virtual reality products in the 1980s, and he has since become a vociferous critic of social media and now of the kind of doomsday culture that surrounds artificial intelligence, the reverence that so many people in Silicon Valley have towards this tipping point moment, as so many people see it, this fork in the road for civilization. He says, calm down, everybody, keep your pants on. Artificial intelligence is a tool. There's nothing going on behind the scenes. The lights are not on, and they will never be on. This point of view, and he may be the world's most visible exponent of this point of view, bumps up uneasily against the experience of so many of us when we interact with artificial intelligences like ChatGPT. So I wanted to pick Jaron's brain about it. His name mostly comes up when people Google who is the guy with dreadlocks in the Netflix film The Social Dilemma, which was Netflix's documentary about the perils of social media. So you may recognize Jaron from that film. A quick editorial note here. The first 5 or 10 minutes of this conversation involve me trying to get Jaron to explain a visualization that he has developed of an analogy as to how artificial intelligence actually functions. If it is a bit confusing and hard to visualize, I encourage you to read his piece in The New Yorker entitled How to Picture AI. The subtitle is To Understand Its Strengths and Limitations, We May Need to Adopt a New Perspective. It was published in The New Yorker on the 1st of March, 2024. If you don't want to read that, bear with us in the first 5 or 10 minutes if it is difficult to visualize, because we do expand beyond that and then start talking in more general terms about the utility of AI and what's actually going on in ways that are more comprehensible. But I don't want you to lose faith in the first 5, 6, 7 minutes as he tries to put into words something that is actually quite a visual analogy. This is a fascinating chat. It's worth understanding that before the chat began, Jaron was fiddling around with his connection to the web-based platform that we use to record these interviews on for about 17 minutes, trying to log in correctly. So he started things off reasonably frustrated, and the prickliness continued in ways that are, I think, revealing and instructive. Please enjoy as much as I did this chat with the one and only Jaron Lanier. Have you been wowed by AI, Jaron? Have you had that experience that many of us have had in the past year or two?
No, I'm too close to it. I mean, I work with it directly, so I'm not wowed by it.
There's never been a moment where you've gone, it's doing things that I don't quite understand under the hood?
No, I've never had that experience.
Talk me through the analogy that you made in that New Yorker piece that you wrote recently about trees and forests and generative forest products and phantom trees and a watercolor of a cat in a parachute.
We have this new thing that's having such an impact on so many people. And I'm not saying that I've come up with the perfect way to explain it, but I'm struggling to improve a sort of a story we can tell non-technical people. Now, there's no way to ever completely get science simplifications right with no compromise. There's always going to be a little bit of a compromise. So I've been playing around with alternate explanations that have slightly different compromises than the ones I hear. And some of the stuff I've been doing seems to reach more people in a way that's helpful to them, even if it's not absolutely a perfect or complete explanation. So one of the things I've been playing with is using the kind of explanation that works best for diffusion models for other kinds of large model AI, which is a little bit of a stretch, but it's actually not too bad. It's, given a dimension or two, it's actually not a bad explanation. So the way this works, if you want to try it out on somebody, is it goes like this. 10, 12 years ago, the AI community was quite concerned with how to tell cats from dogs because they're kind of similar, yet people can tell them apart. And so, playing around with a lot of different configurations, we ended up with this realization that organizing a lot of layers of measurements that look at measurements, that look at measurements, that look at measurements works. And so, you say neuron, I say measurement. A neuron is basically something that measures something simple and gives a result. If you have a whole bunch of them looking at a picture, say in a grid, you might be able to do things like measure how sharp the edges are in the little part they're looking at. And then you can have another part look at those, and they might look at how well they align with their neighbors, or God knows what, all kinds of things. And you build up layers and layers and layers of those. When you have a lot of layers, you call it deep. That's what deep means when you hear about deep machine learning. And then at the top, it says cat or dog. And it turns out that structure of having more layers than we originally thought works. You might ask, why does it work? Well, we have some ideas about that, but ultimately, it's something like medicine or weather forecasting or many other things, in that we try different techniques until we find something that works, but we don't necessarily always have a perfect explanation for ourselves. And indeed, we might pretend to more than we really do. It's a bit of a folk technology, if you like, this recognition business. But it's no more so than figuring out which medicine works. It's no more so than figuring out which way of setting interest rates to cool an economy or something like that. I mean, it's just one of those things that people do with complexity. All right, so now you can recognize things. You can tell cats from dogs. A great thing you can do is you can run it backwards. And the way you do that is you start with just a sheet of noise, a screen of snow, and then you run it through this recognizer and you say, is it a cat or a dog? And it'll say, what do you mean? It's neither, it's just snow. But then what you can do is you can add some snow to this snow, randomize it a bit, and then it might say, it's just a smidgen more cat-like now. And so if it's a smidgen more cat-like, keep that new messing up of the snow. And if it's less cat-like, throw it away. Now you just keep on doing that. And every time you keep a result that's a little more cat-like, it's like this cat emerges out of the snow. Like, what else would happen? And at the end of the process, you have a picture of a cat. It's not a specific cat. It's kind of an amalgam of all of the cats that the thing was trained on. And I realized I didn't talk about training. You train.
So let me just clarify for people here. So the when you ask an AI to provide an image of a cat, what it's doing is it's going backwards and reversing the normal order of its learning, essentially, which you're analogizing to being a series of sort of almost like thin templates, if you imagine like you're building up some kind of a layered cake, and each layer is slightly more or less cat-like than the one before it. That's the learning process, and then when it's generating an image, it's doing that backwards?
I don't even know if the layers are more cat-like than the ones below. It's just that cumulatively they can tell a cat from a dog or find a cat, whether there's a cat there at all.
But what's each layer doing, Jaron?
All right. Well, we don't know. That's what I'm saying, is that this is a bit of a folk. It's a bit of a folk art. It's a little bit like dowsing to find where to drill for a well. It's just this thing.
Except it works.
It's better than that. It's better than that because this actually works. So it's not that bad. But the thing is, it's a sort of an empirical / intuitive technique that the community has discovered after trying a lot of different things. And do we have some stories about what works? Sure. Have we absolutely confirmed them? Not really. So I classify it as, it's a known technique that works. And as I was saying, this is what people have to do to deal with the technologies of complexity. Most of medicine works that way. We're only at this point starting to get to the point of precision medicine where we can say, well, we really understand this thing at a molecular level, so we'll do this other thing. But even then, we don't really know what it's going to do until we do extensive testing. And so it's very empirically based. And this recognition phase is like that. And I should mention, in order for it, one of these towers, and you can think of them as like skyscrapers of floors, anything that has a lot of slices together, or the tallest ever wedding cake, but whatever it is, in order to have it look for cats instead of something else, you have to train it on cats. And the way you do that is you get a bunch of known cats and you pass them through it. And whenever it gets it right, you reinforce little changes within it that mostly have to do with emphasizing or de-emphasizing individual measurements distributed throughout the stack.
Right. So a
and
precondition of the building of the wedding cake to the moon is that you have millions or billions of images of cats and dogs that you can feed into it. You're not crazy about the word learning and training because it's sort of anthropomorphic.
yeah, I don't like the anthropomorphizing word.
But the fact is that it's building up its well, again, understanding is anthropomorphic too. But let's just use those terms because I don't know a better one. And it's building up its understanding of what is a cat and what is a dog based on the accurate notation that there are real cats who are online and there are real dogs whose images are online, and it's mapping the differences.
I guarantee that you've participated in this because it's frequently the case that in order to get to something online, you have to pass a CAPTCHA test where it'll say, identify all the fire hydrants in the scene or something like that. And that's a sort of a legacy of that era when Google figured out how to get people to work for free, tagging pictures that would then be fed into these towers to train them. So that's what that's all about.
And is that true? I thought that was a conspiracy theory. Are they using our CAPTCHA data to train AI?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So,
I mean, and by the way, as conspiracies go, it's a pretty mild one. I mean, like it doesn't involve Putin or the sexual abuse of children or flying saucers. It's basically just, I'm not saying it's the worst thing in the world. I'm just saying that it happened. I think this particular thing is more funny than evil, but I do think the reason I mention that, it gives people a concrete sense of what this is like, because there you are feeding the machine, so you can understand part of the process because you did it. And
we end up with a forest basically, and we end up sometimes with phantom trees in the sense of
but you're jumping ahead.
Sorry.
You're jumping ahead. Let me do it. It's my explanation.
This is your baby. I'm not gonna interfere with the birthing of your baby. I will not midwife this any further, Jaron.
Yeah, and it's not perfect. My thing is not perfect. I think it can be improved a lot, but let's at least deal with it, however good or bad it is. So we've done a couple things now. We've trained a tower to find cats. We've run the tower backwards so it can guide noisiness to turn into a cat. Right. So far, we have a way of making a cat picture, which is not a thing in short supply. Okay, so now the really interesting thing happens is when you make a prompt, and a prompt is a combination of different qualities that you want generative AI to adhere to at the same time. So you can say, can you make a picture of a cat that's in a parachute playing a tuba or whatever the hell I said, like just some weird combination. I mean, we'll say a didgeridoo if it's Australia, and maybe it's a kangaroo. I don't know.
I appreciate the modification for cultural relevance.
We'll customize for you. And anyway, you when you do this thing, then when it's moving from snow into something, it has to round robin through all of these different qualities and get all of them to work at once. And then what comes out is really interesting because it naturally fills in all of the weird little gaps that you'd need to have filled in to make the combination make sense. Like, how does a cat hold a tuba or a didgeridoo or whatever? It's a kangaroo. It's a kangaroo. Does the didgeridoo go in the pouch? Does it go to the mouth? It should go to the mouth probably. And I mean, I'm not claiming.
I want to see this AI picture of a kangaroo playing a didgeridoo. Probably even more challenging for an AI to produce than a cat playing a tuba, given that there are fewer images of kangaroos than didgeridoos.
With all respect to the marsupial community, there are going to be more cats online, and the more there is of something, the more robust will be AI's treatment of whatever it is. So anyway, now you get the combination, and the combination is really where the value comes, because it's getting at that combination that's work, that's really interesting. And so if you're just doing funny or surreal pictures, and I'm sure you can go online and get a kangaroo playing a didgeridoo instantly from any of the many services that do this now. You can try our DALL-E if you want, or you can go into oh God, there's so many of these things. There's so much. So just do it. You'll see how it is. It might be good or it might not be. But the thing is, getting those combinations, filling in the gaps. So you were talking about phantom towers. The way I try to explain this is that if you have a bunch of these towers, like you have one that recognizes kangaroos and another one that recognizes didgeridoos, you can imagine this as filling in a phantom tower in between them, like a meadow in the forest. And because there is a real construction there. And if you want to anthropomorphize that, you can call that a sort of creativity. But the reason I like this image is that it gives us an intuition that I think is pretty good about what this is good for and what it's not good for. It's amazing that it can fill in the gaps, but it doesn't particularly go higher than the gaps. It's all a bit of a random process. So once in a while it'll go higher than the gaps, but not a lot and not consistently. So it's a way of amalgamating what people have done before. And some of my AI friends think that that undersells it, or it's not weird or glorious or sci-fi enough. But I disagree with them. I think that's like a fabulous, fabulous thing. Like, basically, what civilization is all about is humans being able to compound efforts and not waste efforts. And so, uh, because we're basically the same people that we were 100,000 years ago. But what's different is that we can be educated with what others have learned before, and we can use tools that others have made before. So, making the past more present for us is what civilization does. And so AI is a form of that, that's fresh and I think really interesting. So like a great example is, instead of making an animal playing a musical instrument, if you just want to make a website, there's so many zillions of websites that have been entered as code on sites like GitHub that you can train systems on, that now when you need a website, you can prompt for it and something will come out that essentially leverages what everybody's done before, so you don't have to start from scratch every single time, and so you can be more productive. I think that's fabulous, and I think it's a very concrete and wonderful tool that brings people a lot. I don't think it's alive. I don't think it's creative in any deep sense. I know some people really want it to be, and if you want it to be, if that's your religion, I don't want to argue religion with you, but I think a really concrete way to understand it is that it lets us leverage what each other have done in the past more effectively than before. And I think that that's brilliant, fantastic, worthwhile. And we can do it for code, we can do it for text, we can do it for images, now for movies, for all kinds of things. And I'm really into it. But I think if it's demystified like that, maybe you lose a little bit of science fiction fantasy, but I think what you gain is you gain more clarity on what you can do with it, and that's got to be worth more.
I found that clarity extremely useful, Jaron. I thought your piece was really eye-opening and revelatory to me as an amateur who just plays around with it. And I hear your reticence about anthropomorphizing this stuff and your kind of clarion call for us to understand it better and to treat it as a tool instead of as if we're generating creatures who are pouring forth from some kind of magical portal that we've just stumbled upon. And yet the experience of using it is an experience of seeing it do things that seem weird. Like you just said, I don't think it's alive, I don't think it's intelligent, I don't think it's truly creative. Those are very different things, right? I mean, we can agree that it's not alive. We can agree that it may not be very creative, but it might be as creative as John Grisham is, and it might be as intelligent as a chimp.
I mean, look, here's the thing about that is that these judgments are kind of subjective. And I have to confess, I don't think I've ever read Grisham's work. I hope that doesn't make me sound like a snob or something, but I'm a little reluctant to sort of dump on somebody who's popular, because a lot of times the most popular writers actually have extraordinary skill.
Yeah, but I'm actually not dumping on him. I mean, I think that, I mean, would you agree that if it's not the case now, it will presumably soon be the case that your average Marvel blockbuster could be produced, the screenplay could be produced by an AI? Like, that's not to say that they're not great works of art. But.
Yeah. Okay, so look, there's a lot of things to say about this. We perceive each other largely through faith. And I mean, going back way early in the history of computers, when they were very small and very slow and very incapable compared to anything we're used to today, you've probably heard of something called ELIZA, which goes back to the 60s when computers could do nothing. And it was a very simple language interaction program that faked people into believing it was a human therapist, and they would pour out their heart and souls to it. And it just did super simplistic stuff of repeating back what people had just said. And yet it passed the Turing test, which is the way we say it convinced people that it was human. And that the thing is, whether somebody finds a particular program to be human or not is kind of up to them. I think this thing of what we decide to be human or not is a matter of faith, but also a matter of politics. And
But I'm
also
not
a matter
saying
of,
human or not. I'm saying
well,
my
intelligent, an entity instead of
yeah,
a.
yeah. Look, but
Yeah,
put it this way: would you do you share my suspicion that in some years, probably sooner than we expect, we'll be interacting with artificial systems in a way that we feel is indistinguishable from interacting with a
well,
sentience?
that's entirely a human choice. I won't, because I'm the seller. I'm not going to drink my own whiskey. I'm not going to get fooled by my own stuff. There's a great drink your own whiskey is an old saying from the bootleg era in the United States. Like, your bootleg whiskey from the Prohibition era might not have been necessarily safe to drink, so you don't drink your own whiskey. But my favorite recent version is from the 90s in hip hop, which is don't get high on your own supply. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
I'm the
right.
seller, I'm the pusher. I'm not gonna buy into this stuff. But you can, if you want, send us money, go for it. But the thing is,
I suspect I won't have a choice. I mean, I suspect that to walk through the world will be to walk through a world that's populated both
well,
by
if
people
you,
and also by systems that seem intelligent.
yeah, the moment you feel you don't have a choice in anything, you should rebel. It's not just this. Like, demand that choice, even if you choose to disagree with me about how it's best used. I mean, if you're losing choice, something's going very, very wrong, and we're not doing our job well. So let me finish the sentence here. Just stop for a second. Let me say something, because I've been trying for a while. Um, we perceive each other through faith, and if you want to believe that other people are special and that simulations of people are different from people, you can't prove that scientifically. There's no absolute proof of it any more than there's an absolute proof about God or anything else, really. It's a matter of faith. It's a matter of how you think about life. Um, so if I argue that these things are tools, not creatures, which is a distinction we sometimes make, um, I can't do it purely on the basis of science or some test or some engineering criteria. I have to ultimately say it's a matter of belief, but it's a matter of belief with pragmatic benefits. If you think that the technology itself is maybe not a human, but is some kind of entity, then you kind of lose the clarity that you're designing technology to benefit these other entities, these humans. Like, there's a danger that you start to design the technology for its own sake and that it spirals into some weirdness. But also, you can start, like, let's remember, AI is always trained on data from people. And so if you pretend that people aren't there, which you kind of have to treat it as entity instead of tool, then you can start to economically displace people who are actually contributing still. And I think actually people will contribute a great deal to AI in the future, because I think we'll have all kinds of new weird uses for AI that require new training data. I really believe that. I'm an optimist about the variety and interestingness of the future. Uh, but if you really believe that the AI is this freestanding thing that's different from people, you might have a tendency to not compensate those people or recognize them, and create a wave of people feeling that they're obsolete, even if they are still contributing, and if it's false. And then, there's just there's a danger of political manipulation. So, like, just let me put this very bluntly: if you believe that something from OpenAI or Microsoft is alive and you treat it as this living thing, you're basically sending me money and I want you to send me money because I'm helping you be more productive, but I don't want you to send me money because I've made your fake girlfriend, which is bullshit. I hope you don't mind me. Oh, you can bleep me or something. I'm sorry about that.
You can swear
But
on this
anyway,
show.
um, but like, the thing is, the way AI is portrayed in the movies is that it's just sort of there, like yeast. It's just in the air. Like, somehow the Matrix happened, and somehow the lady AI in her just kind of appeared, but that's never true. There's some company behind it because the compute's really expensive. So for a lot of it, it's us. And like, why should you be falling in love with us? I mean, like, it's stupid. Like, you have to always look behind the veil and say, who's running this AI? What's the business model? What's actually going on here? And if you really want to treat it as as being like this entity, you give entities empathy and you give them some kind of space, you give them some respect, and that makes you lose your skepticism or your curiosity to see what's behind, because there's no behind the curtain for us humans, but there is for these things, you know. And so I worry that treating them as alive will harm your skepticism, and it's very precious that you keep, you know, it's urgent that you keep it. Okay, so
I hear you. Yeah, I hear you. I mean, your strain of humanism is my favorite thing about you. I loved You Are Not a Widget, and I loved, was it 10 Arguments for Getting Off Social Media?
Something like that. I think that the titles are different in Australia.
Oh, so. Right. Okay. Well, whatever. I mean, you know, your call for people to reclaim their own humanity in the face of machines that force us to behave a certain way and force us to comply with a digital setup of the world. I think one of the things that interests me about your optimism about AI is that AI might actually make the digital interface more humane, might make it less a scenario of us having to comply with, computer says no, and allow computers to become more nimble, more tailor-made to our needs instead of the other way around.
For some reason, you've insisted on using a sucky podcast platform for us to record this. And so it took 17 minutes to just get it to start working. And I would like us to enter an era where the use of AI, because this is a great example. This has been done tens of thousands, maybe millions of times before. Therefore, a trained AI program ought to have been able to get us to get this thing working in 5 seconds instead of 17 minutes. So this is a case where there's missing AI.
Yeah.
AI should have been present to get this to work. It's just a great example of how you can make life better for people. Why did we have to go through this again?
I hear you. Let me then concede that it's useless to think about AI as being like a freestanding entity that's unhinged from the rest of humanity, because all of the training data relies on all of the things that human beings have done.
I just want to say, that you've made a statement that's a little more a little stronger and more judgmental than the way I put it. And the reason why is that there are cases, which I think are not that common, but people will come up and say, you know, I'm dealing with a patient population that was traumatized or that has this or that problem, and interacting with an AI might actually, or they have some cognitive unusual quality, and interacting with an AI might actually really be helpful for them. And I don't want to like declare that to always be horrible. Like I said what I said, but I also am not like an ultimate, you know, fundamentalist about it.
Got it. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm pushing on perhaps a slightly different point, which is computers have been getting better and better at solving problems that humans find hard, starting with, you know, we all started paying attention when they were better at us in chess and so on. And so the question is, does the range of problems that humans find hard to solve expand? And do computers' abilities to integrate information, have a perspective that's larger than our own, and come up with novel solutions to things that are superior than the ones that we can come up without computers, get to such a point at which it's sort of meaningless to ask whether they're not intelligent because they're acting in the world in a way that is practically more intelligent than us? And doesn't that have implications?
No, I mean, your question has a certain kind of answer built in, because your question presumes all kinds of things that I'd reject totally. So I think it's a terrible question. Like
what? What are the assumptions?
Well, for one thing, if somebody can accomplish something using one of these programs that they couldn't have otherwise, what it's done is, the reason, in my view, is that it's increased the ability of them to collaborate with many others from the past and from distant places to work together more effectively. I view it as a form of collaboration rather than as an entity. So I would celebrate it, and I don't see any problem at all. Like, if somebody can come up with some new drug molecule, it's because they've leveraged the work of many, many people who contributed data and effort to the program they're using. So it's a massive collaboration that couldn't have happened before.
Right, but I think
I mean,
isn't there a sorry to interrupt? Isn't there a false binary here between human intelligence as being this thing that is coming out of our own neurons in almost a spooky way versus the parasitic intelligence of an artificial system, which, as you say, is really just a collaboration of all of the input data of all of the people who
yeah,
produced
I
it.
mean,
But show me the human
I just
being who
went through.
isn't
I'm
who
sorry to
isn't
keep on
also.
interrupting you. Part of it
No,
is
I'm not interrupting. I was
where it's
talking. I,
it's hard for me to time. My apologies.
Yeah, no. So just to finish that thought, I mean, where is the
Mhm.
human mind that is insulated from all of the other human, products that have gone into it? When I'm coming up with this sentence, this question to ask you, it's informed by all of the things that I've read of yours and that other people have told me about AI and my own experience with AI. I mean, I'm operating on a set of training data. I wasn't plonked down here from heaven without any preconceptions. Aren't all intelligences integrating information and then spitting out the
Well,
results of that integration?
look, before I answer, I just want you to be aware of how your questions are biased. So when you say, "Is it just a collaboration?" Where I think this new kind of collaboration is spectacular and almost sacred, and so I reject the word "just," which is a way of coloring the whole thing. But anyway, do you remember I just went through that whole thing about how it's a matter of faith?
I remember.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, people are magical, supernatural beings that are a binary coming from angels in heaven. It works for me. And you might say, oh, isn't that superstitious? Whatever. I actually think that thinking of it that way makes the job of technologists infinitely clearer because we define who our beneficiary is, without which we can't even talk about technology. And it also, like, if you want to define a logical scientific system without any cracks, good luck with that. I've worked at fundamentals of physics and mathematics in different phases in my career, and there's always all these weird little creases and cracks. So what I'm doing is just positioning the creases and cracks for the benefit of people. So yeah, absolutely, supernatural, magical, from the angels, different. I'm totally good with it because I think it's the best way of thinking that we have available on a pragmatic basis.
And if a computer becomes capable of interacting in a way that's indistinguishable from a human mind, that doesn't require us to then rethink our own
Okay,
intelligence?
let me fix your question for you. If a new form of collaboration between people works so well that it's functioning better than any individual person could on their own, does that reduce individual people? No, it celebrates them.
But I'm not arguing that it would reduce individual people. Isn't the question whether or not an artificial system is capable of replicating the kind of intelligence that we normally only associate with biological entities?
I think your question is logically flawed and unanswerable because it's incoherent.
But you need to point out why it's incoherent, don't you?
Because there's no AI, there's only collaborations of people, or at least
But I
that's a
mean,
logical
it feels like a bit of a fudge, Jaron. Like collaborations of people, sure, there are billions, trillions of pieces of information that human beings have created, which we've
Mhm.
fed into these machines, which they are synthesizing and then doing tasks for us and chatting with us in ways that seem completely detached from the inputs to the layperson, right? I mean, maybe not to a person who understands what's going on under the hood, but you even said earlier that we're not sure what's going on under the hood. It's just producing these trees, and we're not entirely sure how it's doing it. So
Mhm.
the output ends up being. I'm not arguing for us to revere these things as mystical, spiritual entities. I'm just arguing for a coherent understanding of what intelligence is, so that I can differentiate mine
By the way,
from the machines.
there's a really funny thing here. Since we're using this stupid platform, I'm just looking at black, but I know you're recording me on camera, so keep on wondering if I'm like picking my nose or something. Kind of
The
funny.
AI would resolve it.
Yeah, I mean, so no, this is a failure of not having enough AI right now, as I said. Okay, look, I mean, if you want to believe that, that's your faith, and you can do it. Uh, I just think there's no pragmatic benefit to your way of thinking, and there are pragmatic benefits to my way of thinking because I can design things for you to use, whereas you're just kind of googly eyed and sending me money. So, I mean, like, I win either way because if you believe what you believe, you send me money. So great.
I mean, I'm not
But
really believing anything though. I'm just trying. I like most people in the world who've played around with this stuff. I'm trying to understand what's going on under the hood, and the
uh-huh.
response that all it's doing is assisting collaboration between me and the millions of people
Oh,
who've
how can you say
created.
all it's doing?
Okay,
That's like
that what it's
horrible.
that, well,
That's like saying all that science does, or all that the law does, or all that literature does. It's like you're demeaning the most important thing. Like, stop that. That's like really dumb. You're better than that.
so would it be different if what it was doing was mindlessly reassembling information that previous people had input into it versus creating something new?
Well, as I said before, there is a certain kind of newness in filling in the gaps between the towers. I'm trying to get at enough nuance here to not oversimplify. That's where we started. But on the other hand, if you want to do the absolute oversimplification, it's more accurate to say that there's nothing new than to emphasize things that are new. That would be closer to the
Right. I
truth.
mean, so that's all I'm saying when I'm saying all. Like the work that the word all it's doing is to differentiate between if someone says basically what I'm dealing with is an autofill is a sophisticated autocomplete, right? It's just like when I'm typing on my phone and the phone suggests what word I might be wanting to produce
Listen,
next.
large
That's
language models
basically what a
are
large language
sophisticated
model.
autocomplete.
Right.
That's what
That
there
that to
is. I
me
mean, it's precisely
justifies.
what we do.
Yeah, that to me is a less impressive feat than the things that it seems to be doing when I, with my primitive mammalian brain, interact with it and get my
Mm.
socks blown off by what seem to be somersaults of ingenuity on its part. So when I say
Well,
all it's doing, I just mean the subjective experience of me interacting with a calculator is like, well, all it's doing is crunching numbers. I would not apply the word all to a machine that makes me laugh because it tells me what seems to be an original joke.
uh, well, I mean, there's a few things to say about that. I mean, we train on people's jokes and on many things, and so once again, it's not it doing it. It's like you have a writer's room with all these people, and they made a joke, and you have to get that through your head that that's how it actually works. And it can be impressive, it can be super helpful. It's just not a creature, it's not a thing in itself. It's a collaboration. And I we have a lot of us grew up on science fiction movies that make it hard to think about that, because we have the Matrix and Skynet and all that, and com- the the much more attractive Commander Data, but we have this image of these things as these separate entities. There's a whole interesting social history about that, which is another story. But um, once again, it's a matter of faith, and I don't like to argue with people about religion. But you obviously have this thing where you want to perceive them. I will let you know I'm old enough to have been around when things like pocket calculators were fresh, and people were like crazy impressed with those too. Not in all that dissimilar a way, actually. And I don't know. I mean, it's like if if you enjoy the experience of being impressed in that way, I don't want to deny it to you, but just like keep a little skepticism in the back of your mind, just for your own power, for your own, you don't want to be enfeebled by the theatrics we might present to you.
Mm.
Uh, just like, think for yourself a little here,
No, I don't, yeah, I get that. I get that. I worry that it'll become increasingly difficult. I worry that quarantining biological intelligence from artificial intelligence in a practical sense in 5, 10, 20 years will become very challenging.
That's a possible scenario, but the thing that would make it challenging is not the code, but the societal, legal, business, and just
Or maybe our biological biases, Jaron. I mean, maybe the fact that we are linguistic mammals and that we're easily manipulated by the illusion of
yeah.
intelligence when it comes from through
I
language
mean,
or something.
that's a matter that does concern me, and I think it's very worth being worried about that. I think um, I'll tell you something I've observed over time, which is that anytime there's some movement that proposes a way of thinking about the world that's initially fresh and radical, whether it's political or religious or sexual or whatever, it proceeds for a while and it gets more and more intellectual and more abstract. And when radicalness sort of becomes old, there's this weird moment of a vacuum where the thing that fills it in is the oldest forms of power, of just intimidation and violence and all that. And so you tend to see fancy digital things gradually associating themselves with populism and all that. Now, I hope I'm wrong about that, but I'll just note that, you know, a lot of there's this weird thing where a lot of people who get into weird digital schemes that are supposed to save anything like crypto or something, a few years later they seem to be more open to odd macho populist politics. And I think it's just because things get so abstract that that's what remains at the end of it all. And so the thing I'm worried about, treating AI as real, is that it'll become this weird hall of mirrors where people will start making fake personages to fool each other, and the whole thing will stir up into a dizzying jumble. And then at the end of that, what's left that is real is the most retro forms of power, and the most retro primitive motivations. So
Mm.
we have this way of undoing our own sophistication by letting it get too unhinged. So that's a scenario I worry about, which I think we can see hints of already.
Well said. Yeah, I completely share that concern. And the other concern would just be if AI, to call it, just to call it that, if that super empowers individuals to solve problems much better than they were able to previously, so that I can produce biological weapons, or I can produce computer viruses, or I can, you name it. What does a world of super empowered individuals look like?
It probably looks like a return to the most primitive thuggery, because ultimately then you end up with uh, whoever can impose fear upon enough others becomes a chieftain or something. I mean, I think it becomes a very primitive situation. Um, I think that's where we land. Um, by the way, uh, there's another element to this, which is the I am not in an extreme minority at all within the technical community that works on this stuff, but I'm in a minority. I mean, I don't know exactly where I stand, but I would say at this point maybe something like a quarter of my colleagues agree with me and most do not, and there's a lot that maybe are in between or something. Um, and the thing is, for those who want to perceive that we're making new creatures, who like personifying them, who like them to be personalities you talk to instead of tools you use, there's a reticence to explain them beyond a certain point because they like the mystery of it. Like you were talking about, how I might be assigning some kind of ineffable mystery to people, but some AI scientists do exactly that to AI. And let me give you an example of that. You just brought up the specter of, like, what if somebody could use a fancy AI system to help them make a doomsday virus or weapon of some kind? Um, Very worrying scenario. So how would you defeat that? Well, we do a lot of things now to make that unlikely, extremely unlikely. Nothing like that's happened yet. Um, I think we're doing a reasonable job at that. Um, so, but ultimately, like, what I'm saying is technically correct, that all these large models are ultimately trained on data from people. I mean, there's synthetic data in there, but even that is an extension of the data from people. And so if we could trace which people's data was the most influential in a given AI output, we could trap all the sneaky people trying to use it for things. Because right now, if you just ask for a deadly virus design, it'll stop you because, um, to my knowledge, all the people doing big models would trap for that and have done a lot of red teaming or adversarial simulation to try to catch those cases. And there's also a very careful removal of things from the training data, but because it can fill in the gaps between towers, it might be able to recreate such things anyway. So you have to do both. You have to do everything you can. But what if you could trace intent? And so somebody might say, oh, all I'm doing is I want cake recipes for my grandmother's birthday, but they might have a sneaky way of prompting so that they're also getting information on how to make a bomb or something. We've seen fake adversaries get away with things like that in order to help our stuff be more robust. But anyway, if you could trace the individual source documents that were in use for a given output, you would have immediately revealed what the true intent is. Like you would say, oh, God, this prompt actually invoked this bomb thing or this virus thing. Okay, okay, these people are clever, but they're not clever enough when we have an X-ray into what's actually happening. Right now, I think part of the reason we don't have that X-ray, well, to be honest, it's technically difficult and not free to do, but there's also an ideological issue there, in which people are mystifying the AI. They want to cover up the original human sources and make it seem more mysterious than it needs to be. That's also true for the internet, by the way, which was given a needless oracle quality by forgetting where things came from and making it all a bit more mysterious, which has turned into a security and economic nightmare. But let's leave that aside. There's been this thing in technical culture, even from before AI, of trying to mystify the technology a bit, and not trace where things came from in order to have this mysterious oracle entity illusion come out. But it's dangerous. And one of the reasons that I agitate against it is precisely so that we can do a better job at safety and helping people know what's actually going on. I mean, I think we need that.
Right. And well, one of the things that you're up to at the moment is agitating for these systems to become less of a black box, so that if you are able to hoodwink the layperson into asking for a birthday cake recipe, which actually has embedded in it some request for bomb-making recipe, and even if the output seems innocuous and looks like a birthday cake recipe, we need to be able to peer into the middle point of what the black box is actually doing, so that as it's crunching the data, we can see that what's being fed in is actually some bomb-making recipe and not exclusively a wedding cake recipe. This ties in neatly to your call for what you call data dignity, which is essentially, well, do you want to explain what data dignity means?
Data dignity is just that as technology shifts and changes, when somebody does make a contribution, whatever the new situation is, we find some way that they can be recognized and paid instead of just lost and forgotten. So here, I'll give you an example. Let's suppose in the future, we have some marvelous anti-gravity technology and we can all fly up into space, and we have some weird biomod where we can survive in the vacuum. And what we want to do is we want to grow all kinds of weird new limbs in order to be able to manipulate this new world and fly around asteroids and do things. Is that science fiction-y enough for you?
Yeah.
And that's a plausible future. I mean, the anti-gravity part eludes us, but maybe it's only one idea away. Who knows? Anyway, the point is, in that case, a tricky tech company might get a bunch of people to voluntarily enter in designs for these new limbs or to train an AI that then can make many more of them. So what I want to see in the future is, instead of creating more dependent classes of people who are contributing but aren't paid, I want to see more creative classes where there are people who are contributing in creative ways and are paid. Now, the people who seem the most, I don't know, science fiction in AI actually have this weirdly closed view of the future where they think that the AI we've already trained is all we'll ever need and it'll do the future. I don't think that's true at all. I view the future as being very open and filled with new surprising things. And I think there'll be a lot of room for new classes of creative people to do new things that create new AIs, and that'll just continue. This thing of creating this idea that you create classes of dependent people and support everybody with a universal income scheme or something is a recipe for some kind of centralized control, and once again, a way that you have incredible political regression to the most primitive state, in my view. I think the way to have decency in society is to always recognize people and reward them and give them some degree of choice and autonomy to the degree that's possible, which is not infinite, but you should always create a creative class instead of a dependent one. So we've called weirdly, Satya Nadella came up with data dignity as a moniker for it, which is kind of cool. But I would say it's kind of a minority position, but more and more people are interested in it throughout the industry, and I just want to keep on advocating for it as an ideal.
I love the idea of breaking open the black box, identifying whose human-made data is going into the artificial intelligence and is responsible for its output, and then compensating those people in some way, the response likely is going to be, well, we can't untangle that pile of spaghetti. Like, there's so much stuff going into it. We've got millions, or how many of the billions of images of cats that have gone in, whose image of a cat gets priority to get compensated for this new image of a cat?
We retrain these things, approximately every year and a half or something. So we have many opportunities to go back and start doing it with the big models. And if somebody says it's technically impossible, they're not very good at what they do. I mean, honestly, I'm good at this. I know that it's possible. I think it's hard. I think a much more serious question would be that it would be expensive. And that criticism has a leg to stand on, because it's already insanely expensive to compile each year's new big model. And a key thing to doing data dignity is having a way to do it efficiently in every sense. And there, I think we still need more research and innovation, and that would be a very legitimate criticism. But I've never seen an argument that indicates that it can't be done efficiently enough. It's just a question of how soon we get there. But that's a real challenge, and I would not deny that.
And Jaron, there's an apocalyptic class of AI analysts who say that as these systems get increasingly sophisticated, they're going to run ahead of us in problem solving, and that we're going to be struggling to keep up with the solutions that they can come up with. That if an artificial system can do as much problem solving as a human mind could do in 10,000 years in 1 second, then it will see opportunities and it will be able to resolve things in a way that bamboozle and baffle us. And that therefore we're sort of giving birth to systems that we're not really going to be able to control, because we're not going to be able to fully understand what they're doing. What do you say to that?
Well, I want to say two things. First, I want to make a sociological observation that many of the people who say that are also the ones doing it. It's a really weird thing. Like, I'll go to one of these off the record things where the leaders in AI are getting together, and the people who are sometimes called the doomers are also the ones working at different companies pushing it. And they say, well, how do you reconcile it? And it's weird. Like, some of them say, well, if it's going to happen, our team should be the first to get there because we'll be less terrible than those other people. Or sometimes they say, humans have had their chance, let's go to the next species. Or sometimes they'll just say, it's destiny, it's the rapture, it's like a mystical destination that they feel compelled to, and they feel it's beyond them to even judge it or something. And I find all of that to be kind of horrible. Like, I think like what we should try to do is demystify and then take responsibility based on that.
Is it not analogous to something like the Manhattan Project, where it's like, yeah, we're giving birth to this horrible thing, but other people are going to do it too, so we'd rather have it?
Yeah, I mean, that's an analogy that's often brought up, but I want to suggest a different analogy, which is to capitalism. Okay, so capitalism, in a sense, was the first AI. It's this information system where we combine the efforts and actions of many people into this complicated thing that does things that are a little beyond us. Like the way a market can organize the world and get things to happen is beyond what a command economy can do. That's been demonstrated over and over again. And so, and by the way, it was also personified. Adam Smith called it the invisible hand. So it also was treated as a creature by some. And then it also is a bit mysterious in its ways, and the people who regulate them do so with empirical techniques rather than perfect theoretical models. And one of the ways I talk about data dignity is trying to become Keynesian about computer science, for those who will recognize that. But anyway, let's leave that aside. Now, if you talk to people who are deeply skeptical and fearful of capitalism, their critique of it sounds very, very similar to AI doomists. Like they'll say, you guys are replacing people, because indeed in the United States, corporations are legally people, which I think is ridiculous for the same reasons I said all that about AI programs. But anyway, that is our law now, and that's true in many ways around the world. And we're the big dog in the world of capitalism, so we have an influence on everybody else that way. But then people are worried that capitalism has this way of possibly destroying humanity by enforcing these incredibly short-sighted incentives that also tend to concentrate power and influence on an ever smaller number of people, who then there's a vicious cycle in which those people become crazier and crazier from being cut off from reality, and then the whole thing falls apart. It's a very familiar critique, and there's definitely something to it. And to me, that's the same thing, really, as the AI doom debate. Capitalism is kind of the early primitive prototype of AI, in my view. It's a way of people cooperating that actually does do new things that are really important. It's really powerful. And yet it can also be given too much birth and go out of control and do great damage, and markets can fail. And there can be a weird political side effect where it can tend to benefit some people to a ridiculous degree. So the way what we call in math network effects can tend to concentrate capital beyond reason are similar to the way only a small number of companies can compute the big AI models. So there's a concentration of power and influence that's maybe a little beyond reason. There's a lot of similarity there. And yet, I believe that markets are good enough as tools for us to have them. And I believe that Keynesian regulation can work. And I believe that civil society and politics can balance the problems with capitalism. And I hope for that. Some of my leftist friends think I'm naive, but essentially that's the spirit in which I also wish to approach AI. And I think the solutions are not unrelated. I think in a sense, the way to fix AI for the future is very similar to how to make capitalism be a beneficial tool instead of our destruction. In both cases, it's kind of dramatic and it might not go well. And yet in both cases, I really do think we all like a lot of the benefits of modernity, and these big systems are what make modernity possible. And I think we really mostly want to make this work, and I really believe that we can.
So in economics, in Keynesianism, you would iron out the peaks and troughs by adjusting the monetary supply. What's the analog in computer science?
You would say if there's some amazing new wealth created by AI, you would make sure that it's shared with the people who did the most to add data, code, infrastructure, all the different aspects that made the AI possible. So if there's some new hit movie that comes out of a generative AI program, all the people upstream from that who contributed clips that the thing was trained on should get credit, and it's like a new way that they become a part of the
Right, I see. But aren't the doomsayers, aren't they fearing something worse than just a free rider problem? They're fearing...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And there are, but the thing is, I think the free ride problem is the precedent for the bad doom problems, because that's where you start to create the out of control, self-reinforcing concentration of power and the black boxism. Like, if you defeat the black box and you have more people participating, you make it less likely that the rogue person will program the thing to destroy the world. I mean, I think they go together very well.
What if it's not a rogue person destroying the world, but you take the doomsdayers at their worst fears, and it's simply that the system itself... I mean, I struggle not to anthropomorphize it, which I know will irritate you, but the system itself is...
You can't avoid anthropomorphizing it. If there's going to be a Skynet with little drones that run around killing everybody, there has to be, within the generative program that operates the robots, that built the factories and mine the goods, that then create those Skynet-y drones, tracing it back, there's something about how to kill people. I mean, like, it's revealed. And so...
But what if it's, what if it's something more innocuous, like it's just the unintended consequences of the system achieving goals that we've given it? We tell it to solve climate change, and it realizes that one way to do that is to de-amplify my voice. I don't know why it would think that, but and therefore, my
Right.
social media
This is
feeds get
this is called
deprioritized,
a
and yeah,
yeah. We call this the paperclip scenario,
yeah,
where you tell it to make more paper clips, and then it does nothing but that and destroys everything else on Earth for the sake of paper clips. Um, well, to the degree the thing is designed not as a black box but revealed, to the degree it's designed as a tool and not a creature, so it doesn't have its own autonomy, to the degree there's sort of a constant audit because somebody might want to be owed money instead of a black box operation, the paperclip scenario becomes vastly reduced. The only alternative to all that stuff is to have AIs looking at AIs, which is the current fashion, where you have one AI that's trained to recognize whether another AI might destroy humanity for the sake of paperclips or whatever. And the problem with that infinite regress is that it's not grounded, and you could have a systemic error in it, and you couldn't even tell. So I think this idea of undoing the black box, having a lot of accountability to people, having a lot of participation, opens it up and makes that sort of thing less likely.
right. So if
Uh,
we keep them as black boxes, they could go off the rails.
well, yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like in any kind of governance. A dictator starts a war more easily than a democracy. That doesn't mean that democracies can't and don't, but it's just easier for Russia to attack Ukraine when it has an autocrat in power.
Yeah.
And so it's a very similar thing, but it's just for the governance of technology. So once again, I think the particular spiritual choice of treating them as creatures instead of tools does make it harder to reduce risks.
And Jaron, lastly, I want to get your thoughts about how we're going to interact with artificial systems, like just in the physical world. Because
Mm-hmm.
40 years ago, when you were a pioneer on virtual reality, if you fast forwarded to today, would you be disappointed or surprised or intrigued by the way that we're
Well,
interfacing with computers?
I mean, not really surprised, because the person who did more than anyone else to create the perspective on AI that I disagree with is Marvin Minsky, and he was my main mentor when I was a kid. So I've been arguing this forever, and it was very clear that that perspective had a certain kind of appeal within the tech community and within a lot of the types of people who excel at math and computer science. And for whatever reason, and so in a way, I hate to say this, but this is all kind of what I was expecting. I think I'm a little.
Even in terms of us sitting in front of screens and using mouses and keyboards, like would you, if in the 80s I told you that in the 2020s no one would be using virtual reality except for on a lark, what would you have made of that?
Oh. Well, that's a really interesting question. So, um, I have always argued from the earliest days of virtual reality, which were for me in the 70s, that it wasn't destined to be something people would use all the time or spend hours and hours in, but it was more a special thing. I used to say, as a business, it'll be more like fine wine than like pop soda. It's not going to be this universal, ubiquitous, always thing. It'll be the special thing that'll be very quality driven, and probably there'll be an endless quality race, so it'll never really get cheap, and it'll always be the special, delectable thing. And I still think that's the best way to think about it, and I think eventually the industry will land there, because I think it's just a good way to think about it. I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's also just a cooler, having experienced it a lot in different ways. I like using it that way. It keeps its specialness. I still love virtual reality after all these years. I think it's great, but it should be a really special little art thing. I don't use it all the time still, even though it's gotten better, by most measures. I still like it as a special thing instead of as an ordinary thing. It just has a wonderful identity as a special thing.
What's the best thing about its specialness?
Well, here I'll expose myself as the humanist spiritual softy that I'm accused of being all the time. One thing I love about it is that when you take off the headset, you notice the real world better. It's like the first palate freshener you've had since you were born, really. And so you notice just the textures and just the physicality, the way the air moves. You notice like details, or at least that's what I find. I think a lot of people don't these days because they're taught to use it in a different way. But if you let yourself be sensitive to that moment when you come out, it's really amazing. But then there's this other thing, which I think is even more profound. So one of the things that I've always wanted to do with VR is make it as intensely strange as possible, because why wouldn't you want that, right? And so early on, I explored turning into different animals and trying to discover which alternate bodies your brain could control well, which is a fascinating study because it explores the path the brain evolved through in deep time. It's really wonderful. But anyway, you can turn into all kinds of creatures, but then you can also push that even further, and you can have the sensation of being in a body that isn't singly connected, but instead is kind of distributed. And this is by measuring your real body and mapping it to different features in the virtual world. You can experience a shared body. You can do all these crazy things. And what's the best thing about all that is throughout it all, no matter how weird it gets, there's this little nub, there's this little thing that continues through, and that's your consciousness. What I think of virtual reality as a consciousness noticing system, which is a very mystical thing to say, and you could say I'm just kidding myself, and I can't prove you're wrong, honestly. But almost everything with technology and science gravitates away from that. AI certainly does, very obviously. But here's a case where a technical thing actually brings you to it, because if not for your consciousness, what's going on? Like there's this thing there, there's something there.
Jaron,
And
sorry, finish the thought.
no, I mean, it's like, and once you start seeing that, you start saying, well, wait, why is this moment in time, why is the present moment different from other moments? Why am I here instead of there? And you realize that the whole way the world is put together implies this little nub of consciousness anyway, but with virtual reality, you start to notice it. And I love that about it.
It can't have escaped your attention that you could say everything that you just said, and you could swap out the words virtual reality for the word LSD, and it would still make sense.
Maybe. I mean, I used to know both Albert Hoffman, who invented it, and Timothy Leary very well. That he dedicated a book to me, and but I never took it, so I can't speak to it directly. Tim Leary used to call me the control group. I just had this intuition that it wasn't for me, really. I think it's probably a different thing, but many might disagree, and that's super. I don't know. I don't know really. So I still have the intuition that it's not for me. Um, I'm kind of a straight person, I guess, in some ways. I
I
love
mean, who
hanging
needs
out.
it when you've got virtual reality? By the sounds of it, I need to get on, I need to
Yeah.
get on more virtual reality. Clearly,
I I don't know. I mean, I'm not here to judge anybody else. I always enjoyed the psychedelic community. I knew many of them and had a lot of experiences in that world, but not for me, and I think that's okay. And if for somebody who comes up to me and says, I'm just really not into virtual reality, that's fine. I love human variety. I love it when people can sense who they are and it's distinct from who other people are. I think that's all really essential, and it's good
mm.
stuff.
Jaron, I have 6-year-old kids. How optimistic or pessimistic should I be about the world in 30 years' time? What's your general? If you put on your prognosticator's hat, what's your general
Yeah,
take?
that's actually, I think, the most important question to ask right now, because there are so many trends that um, would certainly appear to be quite dismal happening at the moment, aren't there? And the obvious one being climate, but there's really a cluster of things adjacent to climate as well, about fresh water and just so many things that are worth worrying about. Um, and politically, the world seems to be sort of almost like stubbornly determined to be crummy. I mean, it's awful, and a lot of that is social media, but that's not all of it. And uh, I don't know. I mean, I have a kid as well, older than yours, but I worry about that a great deal. I think I find hope in that humanity has gone through challenging and dark and scary periods many times before, and somehow or other we've always found our way through. Um, I think whether or not one is freaked out by the way things seem to be going, it's clear that our responsibility is to do the best we can, obviously. So, in a way, it doesn't have any impact on what happens next. I mean, either way, our responsibility is to do the best we can. So, gloom, no gloom, who cares? Our job is to just try to make it better, right? And I try to stick with that. I try to stick with the feeling that I'm I'm doing my best as I understand it to make things better. And I, you know, I don't think there's any superhero who will descend from the sky to save us. I don't think there are any guarantees, but I do have just a whole lot of hope based, I think, reasonably on the past.
Well, Jaron, you've contributed more than your fair share to this mortal coil in your time so far. I look forward to keeping track of the next phase of your career. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh, hey, thanks so much. Take good care.
Thank you.